So the scope of this video here is going to seem a little bit broad, but as it pertains to the Algebra 2 Regents, there are a few things that the Regents focuses on as far as when a study is reliable or flawed. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the ways that you can make sure that if you're conducting a study of some sort, you're doing it without any sort of bias or any flaws in the method of sampling. So some of the critical components that we're going to discuss here. The first thing is that when you're running an experiment, you need to have two groups, and specifically those two groups are going to serve two different purposes. So this might feel a lot like something you might have done in a science class, but your first group is going to be called your control group. And that group is going to be the group that consistently maintains a predictable behavior, or the more predictable behavior. So if you're running an experiment, you need one group to be able to compare the people who are testing the drug or trying out the new thing that you're trying to test. You need to compare them to something, and these are your control group. All right, so then the other group of people, the people who are trying the new thing or doing the new thing, or the people who you're testing the results of, they are your experimental group. And what they're doing is trying out the variable or whatever you're testing that's the focus of the experiment. So if I were trying to figure out what it is that drug A does to a group of people, I would want to have two groups. I would want to make sure that they're large groups, and I would want to make sure that they're equal in size. And I would give one group drug A, and I would give the other group, which would have the same number of people in it, some placebo or just a sugar pill or something. The people taking the drug, they don't know what it is that they're getting, so they're going to behave predictably. They're getting nothing, right? So I know what they're going to do, but I'm going to compare the people who got drug A to the people who got the placebo. So when we are testing a hypothesis of some sort, we want to make sure that if we're running an experiment, we have these two groups. And another thing is we have to make sure that the people participating in our experiment are randomly selected. This is a big thing. All groups chosen must be selected as randomly as possible to eliminate bias. So if one of your groups is biased, that means that your results are going to be skewed and they're not going to be reliable. So we need to make sure that everyone's chosen totally randomly. All right, so there are some different types of bias that we need to discuss, and I'm just going to write them down and discuss what they are. So one type of bias would be something called response bias. And this would be if the people in this group had a reason to lie. So for example, if I'm trying to figure out why students are failing my exams, so I poll the class and I ask a student, how long do you study for exams? The student might not give me an answer that's correct, an answer that's realistic or true, because they don't want me to know that they don't study, right? So I want to eliminate these types of things. I also want to eliminate non-response bias. And this would be if I neglected reasons for why people wouldn't respond. So if I send out a survey and it's not anonymous, maybe people are just going to choose not to take the survey if they fall into a particular group because they don't want me to know who they are and what their responses were. So I don't want people to be answering the questions and lying, and I don't want people to be not taking surveys or not answering questions because they feel that it's not a safe environment to answer those questions in. Also, I want to eliminate voluntary response sampling. I don't want people volunteering to participate in an experiment that I'm trying to run because I might get people who fall within a certain group. One example that the Regents likes to give is they've given some problems in the past where it'll say something like, a truck driver has a sign on the back that says, if you don't like my driving or if you have a problem with my driving, please contact this number or something of that nature. You're going to get an unrealistic number of people calling that hotline because the only people who are calling are people who are volunteering to give that information in. People who are happy with the driver are not going to call, but people who are angry are going to call. So you're going to get a disproportionate sample where you're going to find that most of the people calling are angry. and that's not necessarily going to reflect the larger group. So we don't want people only participating because they're volunteering. Sometimes we want people to just be told to participate. Otherwise, we're going to have this opportunity for some sort of bias. And one other thing is I don't want to be sampling just based on convenience. I don't want to only be surveying or testing people who are nearby or people who are easy to communicate with or people who fit into a certain group that'll make it more accessible to me to acquire data. So all of these different things can be a recipe for unreliable data. And so if we're running an experiment or conducting some sort of trial, we need to make sure that we are keeping these sorts of things in mind when we're designing the experiment and trying to eliminate these possibilities as reasons for why it might not have gone well. So what I want to do here is just talk about the differences between these types of methods of collecting data. All right, so we've got a sample study. So in a sample study, if we're trying to learn about a population or a group of people, we will study a sample of people and give them a survey or run an experiment with them or something to try to draw conclusions about the larger group. So this would be a situation where we'd want to make sure we have a reliable representation in the sample so that we can draw conclusions about the population. An observational study is just data that's gathered from random samples to test some sort of hypothesis. So maybe I want to know how long I can expect to wait at the DMV the next time I go. If I went to the DMV at random times during the day and just counted how many people are waiting in line, then I would get an idea of if I were to go, this is the average amount of time that I would have to wait. If I pick random times, random samples of wait times. And then finally an experiment, which is the most logical way and the most reliable way of determining what some sort of expected result would be. So in an experiment, you're testing a hypothesis using a control group and an experimental group. And ideally, we would run an experiment like this all the time to figure out what's going to happen if I do a certain thing. But there are issues that arise, like it's difficult to get a population of people to participate in an experiment. Or maybe sometimes it would be unethical. If I want to know what's going to happen if people eat this pill, it's unethical for me to just be giving that pill to a sample of the population without knowing what it's going to do to them. So oftentimes an experiment isn't the most practical way to draw a conclusion, but it would be theoretically the most meaningful and most accurate way to determine the results of some sort of hypothesis. So if we were in class, we would have gone through a bunch of examples of some different studies that are given, but I'm just going to go through what my solution will be to each of these, and you should pause the video and try to figure out what the problem is with each of these situations. But in this first situation, there's an observational study, and it's trying to determine the reliability of older siblings. What they did is they surveyed 1,000 individuals who were the oldest members of their families to gather their opinion on older siblings. So trying to find out how people feel about the oldest member of their family, and we're only surveying the people who are the oldest member in their family. So the problem with this is that the sample is not random. If I want to know what people think of oldest siblings, I can't only ask people who are already the oldest sibling. They might have a really high opinion of themselves and think oldest siblings are the greatest, right? So I don't want that. I want people who are, some are the youngest, some are the middle child, some are only children. I need an equal proportion of all of these different types, and I need a large sample that is random rather than just only picking people who fall into one type of group. So it's not random. That's the problem with this first one. So the second study is an experiment to determine the effect of salt on ice. Consisted of pouring 1 teaspoon of salt onto a 2-pound ice cube and recording the time it takes to dissolve. So we're running the experiment. We're pouring salt onto ice, and we're going to clock how long it takes for that ice cube to go away. The thing we're missing here is a control group. So we've got our experimental group. We're watching the salt melt the ice, but what would be great is if we had another ice cube next to it that salt does not come into contact with, and we can see how long that one melts. And then we can compare the two results. So we're missing our control group here. In the last example we've got on the front page, there are some examples on the back that you can do as well. We've got an observational study to gauge the opinion of elderly folks on the quality of nursing homes. And they surveyed 500 residents of the Shady Acres retirement community on the quality of nursing homes. So again, the issue here is that the sample is not random. I've only picked one nursing home, and I'm only asking the opinions of those elderly folks. So I need to broaden my study a little bit. If I want to get an opinion in general of nursing homes as a whole, then I need to ask people who are at a lot of different nursing homes, not just the people at this one nursing home. So we conducted sort of a study last week, and I gathered a bunch of data. And what you're going to be asked to do today is to respond to the way that that study was conducted and answer some questions in a Google form today as a participation grade to see what you think about that study. And I'm going to post in the next video that we'll do on Friday some of the issues that we had with that survey, and we'll discuss the way that maybe it could have been done differently.